Every other week, we get the joy of talking to our friend Connor O'Gara, Saturday Down South. And Connor, I know this is the appetizer. This is not the full meal of what he wants. But do you think when Greg Sankey woke up Monday morning and saw 6 of the 7 teams from the SEC ranked in the top, in the top 25, right at the top there, that maybe like one little tear of joy, or maybe rubbed his hands together and said, "This has always been the plan."
Maybe. I think Greg Sankey has had no shortage of flexes throughout his time as SEC commissioner. That's certainly being one of them because, look, let's be honest. Yes, there are disappointing moments, I think, so far for the SEC this season. And I think you could find a myriad of them with the way that LSU kind of crapped the bed down the stretch against USC. I think you could point to some of the more disappointing performances we've seen so far in non-conference play from some of the lesser teams like Mississippi State, obviously getting blown out by Toledo, or Vandy last week losing at Georgia State. But reality is the top of the poll still says that the SEC is the premier conference in the sport. And if we were talking about the Big Ten or the ACC having that type of representation at the top, we'd be like, whoa, what does it mean about them? And instead with the SEC and for Greg Sankey, it's probably like, yeah, all right, this is kind of what you come to expect.
All right, the big off-the-field story in the SEC this week is obviously the future of Billy Napier and what's going to happen there. Connor, do you see any scenario now that they've gotten drilled twice at home by an in-state rival and a conference foe that he is coaching at Florida next year?
No, it's done. It's done. Like, I think it's just a matter of when they want to do this. When do you want to make this move for the future of your program? Because there is probably going to be no shortage of opinions from the boosters, because I don't believe this will be Scott Strickland's decision. I don't think that he will get to hire a football coach for the third time. And you're trying to get your ducks in a row. Now, that doesn't mean from a buyout standpoint that's already taken care of from everything that I have heard, that they are going to be willing to pay that 26, 27 million, depending on when they fire him. And they're going to they're going to try and go for a big time head coach. And our Neil Blackman reported that they're going to be going after a coach that is in a power conference that is a head coach. And they're not going to try and take the group of 5 route like they did with Billy Napier. They're not going to try and take the assistant route like they did with Will Muschamp. They're going after someone who's established, which they've really only done once in the post-Spurrier era. And, that's Dan Mullen. It's not even Urban Meyer, because as great as that year was with Utah, it's still like, all right, well, they're in the Mountain West at the time. So what I'm saying is they're going to swing big. And this isn't going to be a situation in which they don't pull the trigger because of the money. They are disappointed with everything that has played out. There's just no way around it. The optics could not be worse. And with what we know, with what awaits in that schedule, it's hard to envision any scenario whatsoever in which they're better than a 4-8 team.
Yeah, they. I know, like, it's weird because he's got the a budding quarterback controversy, at least among his fans. Now, last week he rotated them series to series, something that only worked at Florida with Jesse Palmer and I believe Doug Johnson. It might have been Rex Grossman. I can't remember which of that was, but Jesse Palmer was one of them, and that's been a long time ago under Steve Spurrier. Wouldn't it be better for him right now to, like, kind of push it to DJ Lagway and see what happens, as opposed to, because we know what Graham Mertz is.
Chris Leak, Tim Tebow, probably another one got to throw in there.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Like, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. I would like to see DJ Lagway, but I'll be honest, as excited as I am about the player that DJ Lagway can be, whether that's at Florida or somewhere else, is almost kind of secondary, because their issue right now is not just what they do with the quarterback position. Guys, they let Texas A&M come in there and run it all over them after getting embarrassed, and having that type of response against an A&M team that, 1, had not won a true road game in 3 years, and 2, was starting a backup quarterback in Marcel Reed, who had never made a career start, to look that ineffective in the ground game. That's the more alarming thing. And that, to me, isn't just a matter of like, hey, do you not have this linebacker in the right spot, and that's going to make all the difference? What are you doing at quarterback? No. They don't have any sort of defensive foundation. And Billy Napier's answer to his defensive issues that he's had in his first 2 years was hiring the guy in Ron Roberts who was fired each of the last 2 seasons. Now, why would he do that? Well, because it worked out for him at Louisiana, 5 years ago. And Billy Napier said, well, now it's going to work out at Florida. And Billy Napier's a stubborn coach. And he's been, unfortunately for him, he's been, obviously his own worst enemy with some of these hires. And that's why this isn't going anywhere. And I don't really care as much about Graham Mertz, DJ Lagway. Yeah, I'd like to see more DJ Lagway, of course. But if you can't stop a soul defensively, and if teams are just going to run the football all over you, you don't have a prayer in this league.
Well, I mean, at the beginning of last year, Austin Armstrong was one of the most talked about young assistants in the country, and then they brought in the exact opposite. Ron Roberts, we know him from when he was here at Baylor. I mean, he's a grizzled old coach. I'm kind of surprised that Billy Napier has found himself in this spot, given that he comes off of the Saban tree, and the reason that Nick Saban is the greatest coach of all time is he's also, in spite of what people may think or that he may push back against something, he's also the most adaptable. I always read his pushback on things like, hey, you can change this rule or I'm going to use it. And then he would use it and people would be like, oh, my God, they're so good. Well, yeah, he told you what was about to happen.
Yeah, there is an adapt or die belief that Nick Saban has held true to that not enough people give him credit for. And Billy Napier has adapted in certain ways and not adapted well enough in others. And you look at the fact that he's had 3 different defensive play callers because all of them have been really unsuccessful. I mean, let's just call it what it is at this point. And, he adapted in the form of overhauling his nutrition program, as he put it, and having a guy come in that was a game changer coordinator after they had all of their special teams issues and stuff. So he's tried to adapt in certain ways, but none of the buttons that he's pushing are working. And they're not working in part because when you have a head coach that still thinks he needs to be the offensive play caller and he can't cover all these other areas that he needs to as the CEO of the program, it hurts you. It just does, unless you're elite of the elite at it. And there are a few that can do it anymore. Steve Sarkisian's able to do it. Lincoln Riley's able to do it. Even Lincoln Riley's had his fair share of issues with obviously the defensive side of the ball up until this year with Danton Lynn. But there are so few coaches that can do that and also run a program. Josh Heupel, Lane Kiffin, these guys trust offensive play callers. They don't just say, I'm the only one that can touch this offense. And I think that's where Billy Napier has failed his team.
He's pulling a Jimbo for sure. When you say establish, like, who's the pipe dream coach, and then what's more realistic?
Lane Kiffin is a pipe dream.
Okay.
I think there's a real discussion to be had about what's a better job right now. What Lane has at Ole Miss. And I'm not just talking about like what Ole Miss has been since the Richard Nixon administration. I'm talking about what Ole Miss is right now, the alignment that they have with Lane, and the ability that he has to recruit in the transfer portal was really, really important. It's obviously the foundation of this team this year. But I think there is probably more realistic candidates that will surface, like a Jed Fisher in Washington, somebody that's got ties to the Spurrier era, and someone that, he's in year 1 at Washington, but is he going to look at that situation and go, man, I might have bit off more than I could chew with this. And I might be realizing that the Florida job is better than the rebuild that awaits at Washington. And there could be others that definitely surface. I think Lance Leipold is a fascinating candidate because, look, I understand it hasn't gotten off to the best start this season for Kansas, but if you can win anywhere, if you can win there, you can win anywhere. And that guy won at Wisconsin Whitewater. I mean, you put that guy on the moon and he'll field a winning football team. Chris Kleiman is intriguing as well. And then the wild card that I guess kind of gets away from the power conference mantra, but is still one that's just interesting, is Jamie Chadwell. Because Jamie Chadwell runs a very unique offense, and he's done so for a long time. And what he's done, not just at Coastal Carolina, but obviously more recently at Liberty, has the attention of some. And I do think that Florida, if it does maybe whiff on a couple of those top options, that's another guy that they can go to.
I can't wait for the message boards to throw out John Gruden, since now he's told everybody he wants to be a college coach. That's
goodness.
that will be there, and they could hire Jed Fish, or they could hire Lane Kiffin, which would be a home run of a home run. I mean, it would be the achievement of a pipe dream, and there's going to still be fans like, well, we could have had Gruden. We could have had Gruden.
I hope not, man. Like, what are we doing? Like, exactly. It's not 2006 anymore. Let's move past this.
Yeah, let's go this way and not that way. Let's go forward. You mentioned Marcel Reed a second ago. A&M and Mike Elko have said that that the quarterback decision, this was his quote, is going to be a game-time decision every week throughout the rest of the year. Pretty much confirming that they're going to, have a battle, a quarterback controversy, what have you. I think from watching the game and knowing what I know about Colin Klein's offense, that Marcel Reed's skill set fits that offense better than Connor Wigman's, who fit Jimbo Fisher's offense better, maybe. Am I off on that? I mean, not that Jimbo Fisher's offense was anything great anymore, but that's the kind of quarterback that Jimbo liked, as opposed to Marcel Reed, who is dynamic and athletic and can do things that maybe Connor can't.
I think Connor Wigman's a really good athlete.
Yeah.
I really do. Like, I think that he makes plays that, like, go back and watch the Miami game from last year, man. Like, some of the things that guy can do with his legs, you can't, just like with Marcel Reed, which Florida found out the hard way. Like, he's just not a guy that you can turn your back on in single coverage, man coverage, third down. I think that's a really good recipe for success for Connor Wigman. But I'll be honest. I do think that you saw some of those flashes from Marcel Reed that made you think, man, this might be the future right here. I'm not done with Connor Wigman yet. I need to see what it looks like against a defense that isn't Notre Dame, that isn't Marcus Freeman and Al Golden spending an entire offseason dialing up these exotic blitzes against a guy that hadn't played football in 11 months against real competition, that's learning a new offense, that didn't have an established one. Let's see how it looks against a team that's a little bit more, suitable to his skill set, where it's at right now in the SEC. And, you could make the case like, all right, well, Marcel Reed did it on the road at Florida, which he deserves a lot of credit for. They're running the football at will. Life's a lot easier on a quarterback when you're running the football at will. Marcel Reed, a big part of that, about half of his yardage came on that chunk play that I thought was beautifully dialed up by Colin Klein. But let's see kind of what it looks like against the rest of the folks, and not just like a team that has, in my opinion, like Notre Dame defense, despite the Northern Illinois loss, is still going to be one of the best in college football. And I do think that was kind of the perfect recipe for disaster for Connor Wigman week 1.
Oklahoma and Tennessee, the Josh Heupel return to Norman game. There's going to be a lot of emotion in that. Is this Oklahoma team at all equipped to deal with Nico Amaliava and what that offense is going to throw at them?
I do think that the Oklahoma defense is being slept on a little bit. There are a lot of guys on that defense that have been there for all 3 years of the Brent Venables era, and it shows. Most notably, Danny Stutzman, Billy Bowman on the back end, who's just a walking interception. I mean, that guy makes plays all over the place. If he intercepts Nico Amaliava on Saturday night, it will not surprise me. He is a big-time player. But here's the question. What's it going to look like in the trenches? Because so far, that Tennessee offensive line has feasted. They have created running lanes for Dylan Sampson, who is a phenomenal player in his own right, that I think opposing defenses in the SEC are going to have problems with all year. And so far with this Oklahoma defense, you're still kind of figuring out those pieces up front. They were willing to spend big to get Dominic Williams from TCU out of the transfer portal. This is a team that I think you're looking to see them have that type of game that has been really few and far between for Oklahoma, I think, throughout the last decade or so, is that defensive dominant showing against an elite offense, because that's what Tennessee is in every way, shape, and form. So the question is going to be, how do they handle that tempo? And can they rattle a guy that has never started on the road before and put them in a position that, quite frankly, Josh Heupel teams have not typically thrived in, which is trailing? I want to see what that looks like. And if that situation presents itself, I do think that Tennessee is going to have a little bit too much in the tank down the stretch. I do trust that offense to be able to kind of figure things out after things settle down a bit. But, man, I do think that Oklahoma defense is being slept on. I don't think it's going to be another game in which Tennessee is putting up, 68 first-half points or whatever that was against Kent State.
Yeah, your first true road start, going to Gaylord Family Stadium there in Oklahoma, the pop at the beginning of that game is always amazing. Like, it is, there are not many places that for a long term before the kind of entertainment value of the entrance came in. It was like basically them and Miami kind of had the corner on it. If you went to a Miami game at the Orange Bowl, they had the great entrance. But anytime I've ever been to Oklahoma, it's a different open. It's a different thing. They put on a show to start out, and that crowd gets into it fast.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what it's going to look like. I mean, how fitting of an SEC debut is this for Oklahoma with all the different Josh Heupel storylines. But, on top of that, you get to answer this question that people have been asking for 3 years since we found out that this was happening. Is Oklahoma SEC ready? You get to go against a team right now in Tennessee that might be playing better football in the trenches than anybody. and you're going to get to see what it looks like for your group. And that's going to be such a good barometer for who this Oklahoma team is going to be, because we've seen them struggle at moments during these first 3 weeks. And even in the season opener where they win that game against Temple 51-3, those first stringers didn't convert a single third down. And they have had just one of these like weird starts to the season where they're 3-0. Yeah, they're still a top 15 team. But man, if they get blown out in this game against Tennessee in their own building, where, by the way, Dusty Dvorak had this in the next round. They have not been a home underdog this big since 1998. I mean, pre-Bob Stoops era we're talking about here. And if they get blown out, everybody in the SEC is going to be looking at them going, buddy, you're in over your head, and this is going to be a long year one for you.
I want to ask you to close about the ACC and Florida State and Clemson, because I'm very curious in your opinion on that. But should Georgia fans be worried at all, or is this was that their yearly game that they kind of sleepwalk through?
Yeah, I think it was. And I think that if you kind of look, Kirby brought this up immediately after the game in the post-game interviews. He's saying yeah, I mean, I try and tell people all the time, it's hard to play on the SEC on the road. It just is. And I don't think he was just speaking to the Joel Klatt of the world. I think he was referring to his actual team. And sometimes if you don't necessarily have your A game, yeah, I mean, you can get into a 60-minute dogfight with a team like Kentucky that just got taken to the woodshed the previous week. So I do think that that's worth mentioning. But at the same time, they're losing guys in the trenches. That Tate Ratledge injury is significant. Georgia is not exactly dominating teams with that offensive line in the way that we were kind of expecting. And Clemson's defensive line is excellent. So I don't necessarily think that's an indictment of Georgia's offensive line. But, man, they lose their best offensive lineman. And to a guy that, just suffered multiple injuries in that game. And what's it going to look like there? They're still trying to work to get Mykel Williams back on the defensive side of the ball. So, this Georgia team that we are so used to just assuming they're going to have an advantage in the trenches, all of a sudden you're kind of looking at them going, man, they're kind of hurting for some depth right now. And they could be trying to figure things out. And, maybe this bye week allow them to get a little bit healthy, and maybe they get a Mykel Williams back. But I think that's more of the big picture thing that I think if you have concerns about Georgia, that's where it starts.
All right, last thing. There's reports, Ross Dellinger, ESPN, lots of different ones have all talked about it, but the ACC and Clemson and Florida State are at least opening conversations about a revenue sharing model that would be more palatable to those two. To me, this seems like they've been in court here for a few months, and there's a good chance they could make a settlement for a separation agreement and move on, and everybody wins something in that, but then kind of they lose at the end of it, in that the ACC will be vulnerable to being the next Pac-12, and Florida State and Clemson, wherever they go, they're not really going to get the deal that they want, and maybe not even have a soft landing like they think they will. So is it better to work on whatever they can to make it at least more palatable for everybody to stay together and talk about this down the line in 6 or 7 years, as opposed to, it's either going to be my way or the highway?
I kind of hope that the ACC does what the Big 12 did. That would be great, right? I mean, I think you look at the Big 12 and what Brett Yormark did in the wake of Texas and Oklahoma leaving in the middle of the night, getting poached by the SEC, and the way that they have pivoted is remarkable. And it's a great lesson in this realignment discussion about what you can do so that you're not at the mercy of your biggest powers. And right now, Clemson and Florida State, very well documented in the courts. Of course, it's going to be a popular topic of discussion as long as it's there, as long as those lawsuits are sitting there, and as long as the grant of rights is in place, which, by the way, these lawyers have been working overtime on this to get this figured out. I'm not finding any loopholes. I'm not seeing a path to that. I'm just not. But what if the ACC just one day is just like, you know what, you want to leave? Go ahead. Go ahead. Because I don't know that the SEC is chomping at the bit to add Florida State. I don't know if the SEC is chomping at the bit to add Clemson. Maybe there'd be some interest from a Virginia or North Carolina or something like that because of the states that they represent that the SEC is trying to get into. But man, what if they just said that and said, you know what, we'll find our options. We're not going to worry about this. You want to do this. You're not going to try and do what Texas did back in 2010, where all of a sudden you have the Longhorn Network and the revenue sharing is different and Texas is the favorite. And what it does for the rest of the conference is it kind of gives you're like, wait a minute, what? And it drives Texas A&M out of the conference. Like, there are definitely ramifications to any decision, none of which sound particularly appealing, other than the ACC just trying to go like, you know what, whatever. You want out of the grant of rights. We're gonna lock in everybody else besides U2 or U4, whoever it is. We're gonna make sure that they're taken care of, and we're gonna figure out a way to make this work, because this is just not a healthy relationship to have with two premier programs in your conference.
Yeah, I think the ACC is at a little bit of a disadvantage in that they've got the last old school commissioner, right, in Jim Phillips, and I think he's showing some adaptability and some toughness, but can he get there fast enough to do this? That's a big question.
Yeah, and I don't know that he will. I mean, you hear them talk, like some of the spin zone stuff with Jim Phillips at ACC Media Days was just so sad. I mean, really, really sad when he's sitting there trying to tell you about, how the ACC like has the most exciting group of teams in college football, and look at all of our national championship representation, because 3 of the 5 active rings in the sport among coaches have been won by ACC coaches. It's like, all right, it was 20 years ago with Mac Brown. Let's chill. But like some of the spin zones that were happening with Jim Phillips, you're like, you don't actually believe this stuff, do you? Like, SMU is a great addition because you get their market, but it's like it just finished in the top 25 for the first time since the Pony Excess days. Like, let's pump the brakes on some of this stuff here. They're getting 18,000 fans at their game. Yeah. Like, let's not pretend like all of a sudden you just poach Texas or Oklahoma or something like that. But yeah, it does feel like he's got a little bit of an old school approach. It was interesting because for a while it seemed like he was going to be the guy who was going to be the next Big Ten commissioner, and all of a sudden, like, that doesn't end up happening. And instead, he ends up going to the ACC, and the Big Ten is what it is today. But still, yeah, it'll be interesting to see the way this plays out with the ACC.
Yeah, also they had that big thing of like the graphic of like the toughest non-conference schedule, like, which I get is like, hey, we're willing to schedule tough teams, but it's like, hey, look how many teams that are better than us that we play.
Right? There's something to be said for that. Yeah.
Yeah. These teams are great. We're going to play them. Like that. Okay. I mean, you've got 50% of this right. Like you missed the other, like you failed the essay part. Multiple choice you nailed. Essay part you failed. Connor, thank you so much. Tell everybody outside of Saturday Down South podcasting, like where else can they find your stuff?
Yeah, appreciate that. SaturdayDownSouth.com, tons and tons of content. I always tell people we are the one-stop shop for any college sports fan. If you want to, I don't want to say waste an afternoon at work, but if you want to not work and instead read about college football, because I mean, it's the middle of September, why wouldn't you? I cannot recommend it enough. No paywall or anything like that. Just great content that we have people that spend tireless hours working to be able to produce for you all. So yeah, SaturdayDownSouth.com. Like I always say, it's the one-stop shop for any college sports fan.
One of my favorites. Absolutely. Love reading your stuff. Love having you on. Connor O'Gara, talk to you in a couple weeks, buddy.
Thanks, man.
Connor O'Gara, Saturday Down South. This is 365 Sports.